Amantha, welcome to Ultrahabits. How are you going?
It's good to be here.
Yeah, yeah, definitely stoked to get you on the show. I was actually on the plane yesterday listening to one of your interviews, and the girl 2 seats next to me had your book.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was really like I wanted to tell her, "Oh, look, I'm about to talk," but I felt like that might be a bit too intense. She was uh she was reading one of your other books though, time wise. But yeah, I thought that was really, really cool.
Oh, that's fun. I must say, I do still get like a bit of a thrill
Mm.
hearing about, sightings in the wild is how I think about it. Like I'll often at the moment, because the health habit has just launched, I'm getting quite a few people sending me photos of, seeing it in the airport or bookshops and
Mhm.
stuff. And I find that quite thrilling.
Yeah, I actually saw your book in the bookshop too. I was in Brisbane, and it was kind of on that table, like bestsellers, and I was like,
Yeah.
man, man, I wanted to take a picture and send it to you because I know you would still dig it, right? Like
Totally.
yeah, you wrote, no matter how many books you write, I would imagine still be
Mm.
super, super cool. But for our audience that don't know your work, you're the founder of Inventium. What is it that you guys do?
We're a behavior change consultancy. So ultimately, what we do is we exist to help people feel better, think better, and do better work. So my background is organizational psychology. So I think about how can we help people feel better and perform better when they're doing the thing that occupies about a
Mm.
third of our adult lives. So that's what we get obsessed over.
Yeah, I love your mission to kill bad work practices. How cool is that, right? How did you get passionate about this work, Amanda? Like, what was your journey to go there?
So I grew up thinking, certainly in my teenage years, that I would become a clinical psychologist. So my
Mm,
mum's a clinical psych. And for those that are not quite sure what that means, it's a psychologist that works with people that are generally having some kind of a mental health um, challenge or diagnosis, and they're looking to work through that in like a kind of, I guess, a counseling therapeutic kind of way. And that's what my mum has done for, gosh, like 50 years now. She's still practicing. And I I loved it. She described it as being a detective of the mind. And I thought, oh, that sounds so cool. And I was always drawn to like work that I could do that would help people in a meaningful way. And the one question I had though about clinical psychology is I didn't understand how my mum could detach herself at night. Like she'd hear, essentially like the most painful stories from people all day. And yes, she was there to help. But I don't know. I find I'm very good at catching people's emotions and then internalizing them. And I thought, how on earth like would I work as a clinical psych? And then in second year psychology, I remember being taught about the different types of psychology because I just thought, oh, this clinical psychology and that's it. But I discovered that there was this thing called organizational psychology. It was a whole field. It was a lot less well known then than it is now. I feel like now it's a little bit more mainstream thanks to people like Adam Grant. But essentially, it's thinking about how can we get the best out of people at work? And that really appealed to me because it was about helping people in a meaningful way, but it was also in a way that I thought, okay, I'm not going to come home and just feel like I'm holding the world on my shoulders in terms of the things that I would be hearing about and helping people with during the day.
mm. Yeah, yeah. I think it takes a really kind of special kind of person to be able to hold that space for people to really be empathetic, but ultimately not own it. I think that would be a really difficult balance, right?
I think it is, and I have had discussions with my mum about how she does it, but I still don't fully understand.
Mm. So when you were getting into organizational behavior, like, was it cutting edge? Were there a lot of theories out there, or were you kind of at I guess the beginning of that whole movement?
Look, I mean, there was so much research, so many theories out there. I was definitely not at the cutting edge.
Mhm.
I think that organizational psychology has been popularized, but certainly there was still, there were tons of journals out there that are dedicated to org psych and org behavior research. But I think, look, I still feel this is a thing, but I mean, like a pet peeve of mine that I've spent my career trying to like solve for, I guess, is that there's so much knowledge that just sits undiscovered and unknown in academic papers because they're like for the average person, they're quite hard to read. It's like they're written in a different language, even though it is still, mostly written in English, but they're just really hard to understand. They're full of jargon, particularly the results section of an academic paper in psychology. Like you need training in statistics in order to understand what are they actually saying. And I see a really important part of my role in my career, and certainly what we do as a company at Inventium, to look at what is being discovered in these scientific papers and make that really simple and practical for people to benefit from and apply in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think you strike me as someone that's very relatable and down to earth and a good conduit for the world of academia to kind of distill that into the world of corporate. Because for someone like me that's running an organization, if I have a bunch of kind of scientists rock up with this kind of jargon, like I need applicable information and someone that could actually help me drive change and understand business challenges. So, from what I understand, you kind of then really moved into productivity. Is that right?
Well, what my journey was after doing my doctorate in organizational psychology is I actually worked in advertising as a consumer psychologist for about 5 years, and this was completely random. I was working in I was like the HR manager of a security firm when I was finishing off my doctorate, and it was horrible. It was such a horrible workplace. Yeah, encountered all sorts of very problematic things there, and and then I just randomly I was looking on Seek or Monster or whatever the main job board was. Like, I mean, this is going back, I don't know, 20 years or something. And I remember I saw this job ad for, I think that like it was called a consumer reporter or some random, advertising esque title. And it was all about understanding consumer behavior. And when I was studying at university, I was always really intrigued by the consumer psychology journals and understanding, why do people buy what they buy? Like, what is behind those decisions? I was just naturally curious. And I thought, oh my gosh, like a job exists where I can get paid to read this research and apply it. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. I had no experience in advertising. I probably didn't even know like what it meant to create a brand or anything. And I applied, and I think it was quite a competitive position, and somehow I ended up getting it, which was crazy to me. And so that then led to me working in advertising for about 5 years and just immersing myself in how do these companies try to change and manipulate people's behavior to get them to do more of the thing that they're trying to do to, essentially make the clients more money. And while intellectually that was very, very interesting work, and I feel like gave me really good skills for starting a business, which was not on the life plan. I'm not someone that, you know, was like had a lemonade stand when I was 8 years old on the street, as I feel like every entrepreneur's got that story. I do not. And so learned some interesting things. But then I felt like after 5 years I'd reached my use by date on the industry, and I needed to get back to really what mattered to me personally in terms of doing work that was making a positive difference to people's lives and getting back to my org psych roots. And that's what led me to start Inventium. And so, in answer to your question around productivity, Inventium actually started out as an innovation consultancy. So, we have spent a lot of our time, and we still do, helping organizations and the people within them become more innovative, like get better at identifying where are some big opportunities to solve, how can you think more creatively, and so on. And then, probably about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I began being really obsessed with personal productivity. I'd read Deep Work by Cal Newport at the time, and when you read those books, and I think Deep Work is that book for many people that just switches something in your brain, and then you can't unsee the way that you've been behaving, and it just feels so insane, that I was letting my day being run by all the shallow, non-cognitively demanding work. Yet here I was, like, trying to be, a thought leader in inverted commas, and certainly a classic knowledge worker, where the benefit of what I bring to the world is in the quality of my thinking and how I can, unpack and dissect and communicate that thinking to the masses. Yet I was barely doing any deep work. And that switched something in me, and led me to broaden out what Inventium does and what I do personally. And that's sort of how productivity came
Mm.
about.
Yeah, for me, I had that moment when I read Essentialism.
Oh,
Y-
yeah.
I mean, that
Such a
book
good
just
book.
blew, right? Like,
Mm,
so, and it was done, it was so concise, right? In the spirit of the book. And it just blew my mind
mm,
how much redundant shit I can
mm.
do. Like, you know what I mean? Like, during the day, or like how I'm just not prioritizing. And for me, like, I have this kind of psychological process where I will attribute importance, the same degree of importance, to everything on my task list, and it
Mm.
has to be done that day. And so it will then drive me. And then I kind of stepped back after reading that book, and I was like, wow, this is like, on my list, my laundry is important as closing that deal. And I'm as focused on both of them, like, I'm like, this is crazy. So that's a wild journey. In terms of your journey in advertising, like, that's always kind of been an industry that's wigged me out. Like, how, when you really think about it, you really understand how humans are not really rational, right? Like, how we respond to advertising, like this fantasy world. It's just like this storytelling piece. Like, was there some real learnings for you that kind of blew your mind during that process?
I think, I mean, like, there definitely was. And for a lot of my time in advertising, I used to write a column for B&T Weekly, which is like one of the main trade mags. It still is one of the main trade mags. And I pitched this column idea to them really early on in my career, because I thought, I need to make a name for myself in this industry because I'm brand new to it. And I was really naive. And there are basically two trade magazines in advertising at the time. There aren't too many more now. And I pitched this idea to both editors, that I would write this column called Did You Know? And I would basically every week would have a theme. Like, one week might be, food and drink. Another week might be, um, like, I don't know, advertising to children,
Yeah.
which was something that I had very strong views about,
Mm.
but different themes. And I would reveal five counterintuitive research findings
All right.
every week. And I mean, amazingly, the editor at B&T at the time said, "I love this," and gave me a back page column, which I wrote
Mm.
for, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years or something like that. Which which was definitely, um, something that was really helpful for my career. But yeah, I think, like, when I think about, just practically, like, there's lots of different research findings that I found really interesting. But I think, practically speaking, and from a business owner point of view, it gave me a really strong appreciation for how important building a brand is. And I think that this is something that typically business owners, they become a business owner because they're really skilled in the thing that they've become a business in. More so for services businesses, but sometimes it's the case for product businesses as well. And and most business owners have never worked in advertising or marketing. But in advertising, like, the importance of brand and what you just unconsciously stand for in people's minds is super important. And also the importance of bringing something unique into the world. And so with Inventium, I was really clear that, like, how we were going to be different, and how we were going to be different at the time when we were, primarily an innovation consultancy, is that everything we did was underpinned by science. And at the time, innovation consultancies, there weren't many, But where they were, like, you know, it was some like ex-creative director that had, you know, done a few great campaigns and was trading off that history to help people think more creatively. And there was no science behind it, and really no evidence that their approach was going to, you know, be able to work for the masses. And so Inventium's position was science-based innovation, and that's still, like, the science-based idea is still very true to where we are now. Like, I think about 17 years on from there, and I think with Inventium, and certainly the feedback that I get from the market, is that people are always surprised at our size. Like, we're typically about a 10-person business, you know, give or take one or two people, depending on sort of what's happening and what our needs, our resourcing needs are. But I think we bat above our weight in terms of the brand presence that we have, that we've been able to do through certain initiatives and strategies that we've had. And I think that's the power of brand and what I learned in those 5 years working as a consumer psych.
No, that's excellent. So, we're talking about productivity now, and it really seems that you became interested in productivity for yourself, and then you probably saw the opportunity to take it into to firms. Like working with firms in terms of productivity, like what are the biggest things that you see that generally impact these firms negatively in terms of productivity?
I think the biggest thing is that, you know, people think so much about money and budget and how is money allocated. And they think so little about time and how are we as individuals that make up an entire organization, how are we using our time? And like, you know, to give you an example, let's just take your average executive assistant that is told to organize a meeting, and and they're probably, they're probably in a big corporate, in a big risk averse kind of situation. And so they want to cover their ass. And so they're going to invite more people rather than less people to a meeting. And they're probably going to just do, like, you know, work to the default in the calendar setting. So it's going to be 30 or 60 minutes, as opposed to how much time that meeting actually deserves. And, you know, let's just say, like, you know, the average hourly rate of one of the executives that is part of that meeting is, let's just say, it's $500 an hour for argument's sake. It's probably a lot more in many organizations, though. And let's just say it's a 10-person meeting, which is not unusual. So that's essentially $5,000 that this executive assistant has spent. Yet, if you look at what they are, what they have permission to decide on in terms of purchasing decisions, maybe that limit is a few $100s, if anything. And like, that is mental. Like, we do not value our time anywhere near as much as we should. And we do not obsess over how we're using our time. Like, many people just squander time by, you know, doing just checks of social media or the news or whatever your, you know, procrastination method of choice is. And I think that's why, like, for companies like Inventium, I think we were the first in Australia to implement the 4-day week. Like, that's why it actually can be successful and increase productivity, despite the fact that people are working, in inverted commas, for less time.
So when you're trying to get an organization, to start to value their time, that then I suppose that kind of culture needs to be communicated top down. Like how do you actually implement that? I mean, without having to go too much into the weeds, because I know it's probably a massive process, but like how would you conceptually take um, a concept like better time management and then apply that or help a company apply that?
Mm. It's a great question. Like, broadly speaking, we build capability. Like, in terms of how we work and how we use our time, it's not something that we're actually trained in. It's just something that, you know, people expect other people to know how to do, but it's not. Like, it's often doing things that feel counterintuitive or unnatural. Like, it feels really natural to multitask or context switch your day, like your way through a day. Like, let's just say you've got a report to write, and typically your average report is hard to write. So you're probably going to be feeling negative emotions as you sit there on your computer. typing and thinking away, and then you're like feeling this unpleasant feeling, and you're feeling kind of stuck, and then your brain goes, oh, I need to relieve that feeling of stuckness, so I'm just going to pop into my inbox because maybe there's a good news email, or maybe I can just like respond to a few emails and get that false sense of progress that you get. It's like it's kind of meaningless progress in many ways, but it feels good to like archive emails, delete things, shoot off some quick replies. And then you suddenly remember like 10, 20 minutes later, hang on, I'm actually meant to be doing this report. And that's the meaningful thing that matters, as opposed to getting into my inbox. And so we've got these ways of working that feel natural, and the technology has been designed in many ways to reduce our productivity, particularly technology and like software that is quite addictive by design. um, and we actually need to train people in how to use their time better, and we get amazing results doing that. But I think, a question that I get asked by a lot of execs that I work with at Inventium is, how do you actually measure productivity? And interestingly, I mean, yes, like we can measure the output of a firm, and, we can measure how many widgets are being produced per hour, or whatever. But it's actually very hard to measure or certainly like there's no common way of measuring like knowledge worker productivity, which I'm very interested in. And I'm currently in the process of piloting a tool to do that, because I think that is a massive hole in the market. Like if we don't know that we're struggling with productivity, what's going to prompt us to actually go, we need to do something here, we need an intervention.
Yeah, you're totally on point there. Like, I mean, it's easy to, you've got lean experts in the manufacturing environment. You can even manage customer service productivity, but like, how do you manage or report on productivity for roles that are really outcome focused? Just with the context switching, and I have a question about like working from home, and obviously COVID kind of drove this. Like, I find when I work from home, I context switch more because I start to sweep, or like like, to be honest, like I'll start to do a lot of different things that are unrelated. Like, do you feel that people are more productive working from home or in the office, or a combination of both? Like, what's been your view on that?
I think it's about being mindful around what do you do best in which environment. I think that working from home, it can be quite polarizing, and it also depends on whether you've got young children in the home, or noisy flatmates, or maybe you're caring for someone. So I think it does depend on what your individual situation is at home. Um, like for me, my home environment is brilliant. That is where I get my best deep work done. But then, Inventium is remote first, which means we have no physical office presence. We gave up our leases in the middle of COVID, like in 2020, and that's a decision that served us really well. But I think for most companies, and certainly most kind of desk based workers are working in a hybrid fashion these days. And I think that people need to give more deliberate thought as to what do they do best in the office, which might be collaboration, it might be just like human connection and socialization with their team. It may well be deep work, but it may well not be deep work. And if it's not deep work, it's really easy to go back into the office and to get to the end of the day, because your day's been filled with meetings and chit chat, and go, today's been really unproductive. What did I even get done? But if you were intentional and said, well, my days in the office are to collaborate and communicate, and make important decisions that need to be made as a group, and ideally face to face, then it actually was a productive day. So I think it's kind
Yeah.
of reframing what a day at home versus what a day in the office means for you in terms of outcomes and productivity.
I think the key point you made there, it's about being aware and kind of auditing your reality, right? Like, everyone's reality is different. Like, for me, I love being in the office when no one's there, like really early. I've got little kids at home, and I'm easily pulled into their context. I'm easily distracted. And for me, I like going in the office, 6:30, 7 a.m., and just banging out a few hours, because I think just being in the office creates a certain vibe and mindset for me. But I think, to your point, I think it's like kind of horses for courses, right? Or courses for horses, whichever way you say that. But how, as we move to habits. Like, is there a relationship between productivity and habits?
Yeah, I mean, I think, anything that you want to become like habitual or ritualized as a behavior, and certainly I can think of many productivity habits that I've tried to, ritualize or habitualize. I think habits play a really big part in that. Ideally, you want behavior that is productive to feel natural and be automatic, which is largely what habits are, as opposed to them feeling like you'd need to think about that and deliberately do that thing. Like a really basic example is I find a lot of people that consume a lot of productivity content will will want to adopt a habit, or maybe they have adopted a habit to not check email first thing in the morning because it sets your day up to be reactive. And so if you can make that a habit, something that just comes naturally to you, that's going to be a lot better in terms of just saving brain power and saving willpower resources, compared to like sitting at your computer and going, oh, I really want to check my email. Oh, okay, maybe I'm going to do it, or maybe I'm just going to resist it for the next hour, and bargaining with yourself. Like, it's so much easier if it's just a habit and it comes naturally.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine when you're trying to impact a business in terms of productivity, like your success to a large degree is attributed to the individual's ability to habituate what you're trying to implement, right? Like, and if they can't, well, how will they improve, I suppose?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many change programs that go on at organizations, and I feel like I
Hmm.
really never hear change managers talk about habit change, when really I think they'd be well versed to think about what are the habits that we want to change, as opposed to what change do we want to do at a really macro level. And and change programs generally fail.
That's my issue with those kind of ad hoc, random, rah rah seminars, right? Like, you got people coming in there, you know, for a day doing some work, and they're still leaving with the same bad habits and processes that they showed up with. But obviously it fulfills the budget, and someone can tick the box and say that they did an event, and there's no long-term sustainable change. Like, your work in your kind of segue into habits, was that also out of personal interest, or was that something that you saw that kind of you needed to do to reinforce the productivity piece in your work, or both?
So I've been thinking about behavior change forever. And a large part of behavior change is thinking about how can we change habits. So I've long, been interested and read and, educated clients around behavior change, and with that, falls habit change. But in terms of why I decided with the current book, The Health Habit, to delve into, well, I guess, write about the psychology of habits, is because I felt it was the piece that was missing from essentially the genre of health and fitness type books. And happy to go deeper there, but that was what drove me. It just felt like a missing piece in that area.
Let's go deeper.
Okay. So so how I guess the idea for the health habit emerged, because I know for me, I'm always interested in why did that author pick that topic to essentially dedicate their life to for a good couple of years, is essentially what you're talking about with the book, in terms of all the research and writing and editing, and then PR and marketing and so forth that comes with deciding on what your next book topic is. And for me, I was thinking about health, because I'm someone that, like, health has been my number one value for as long as I can remember. And that was largely shaped by both my parents having had some major health issues, and really both of them, statistically speaking, being very lucky to still be alive. And it made me really think differently about health. It made me think differently about my own health. And that, like, without my health, I am just not useful in any of the roles that I play in life. Like, I'd be a terrible parent, a terrible partner, a terrible leader, if I don't have my health, and terrible in all the other roles I haven't mentioned. Um, and I read a lot about health. I read a lot of research about health. I constantly running experiments on myself and roping my partner in to improve our health. And I was thinking about health books, like, because I've bought a lot of health books over the years. And like, if you go into a bookshop and you visit the bookshop monthly, there's always like new bestsellers around health. And it occurred to me one day, it's like, why are there new books on health? Because like, presumably, if any one of those books, like those fad diet books or fitness books or sleep books or whatever, if any of them had actually changed people's behavior, like there'd be no market for health books. But what typically happens is that you buy the latest health fad book and you read it and you go, that was great, I'm going to change, and you get really excited, and then nothing changes. And what we know from psychology is that information or knowledge alone is not enough to change behavior. And I think the health category of books is living proof of that. And then in the meantime, if you go to the bookstore, there's a whole other section of books around habit change, like Atomic Habits. Has been like a perennial bestseller. But there's lots of other great books around behavior change and habit change, and they're books that I've read all of them. I have views on all of them. I think it's such an interesting body of knowledge. And I was thinking one day, like, why have those books never met? Like, why have those two genres never like combined to give birth to a book baby? That would be really useful. Like, if we could know what are the most impactful things that we can do to improve our health, and then diagnose what is the psychological barrier standing in the way for me personally, and then what are some behavior change strategies to actually make a permanent change. And that's what my idea was for the health habit.
That's brilliant. And I think you touched and unpacked so much there. I mean, I think with your background in advertising, like you'd understand as to why there is so much material kind of repackaged at the consumer. And I think the consumer feels good when they pick up and buy that book on that airplane, that 1 hour flight, and then they put that book down, with their bookmark and never pick up or implement anything in that. And I think you also said something which we talk a lot about in the recovery community, because I've been in recovery for a long time, that self knowledge doesn't get you anywhere, right? It's the application. And I think, to your point, like, we're living in an era where we're just like overcooked with information. And I mean, it's pretty basic, right? Move your body, eat right, sleep. Like, I mean, it's not rocket science. And I think, to your point, again, I think what's been lacking is like, well, how do we move from what is initially inertia or self will to habituation? Because obviously we know self will and willpower is not efficient, and we want consistency versus motivation, right? Just a side question, like, do you feel that organizations have habits?
Yes, like massively. They've got habits, and often those habits, I mean, I kind of, I guess, like there are norms, which is typically what the culture, like what creates a culture, like what are the
Mm.
behavioral norms, and arguably some of those behavioral norms are habitual. They're kind of automatic. Like I think about something. I'm just thinking if I define this as a habit, but it's certainly a norm in a lot of organizations that your average meeting will start probably about 4 or 5 minutes late. Like that is a cultural norm in many organizations. And that to me is quite shocking. Like if you take an average 60-minute meeting, and if most of those 60-minute meetings are starting 5 minutes late, that is 8% wastage that is happening every day, multiple times a day across an organization. That is hugely costly, but no one seems to care. That blows my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, you're definitely on to something there, because I mean, back to that point around like seminars and the rah rah and the Mentos and everyone's feeling good and high fiving for the day. What people really need is skills, and they need more wisdom and insight as to how to cope better with their job and their role in their environment. And I think that's where habits have weight, and there's depth there, and there's something to anchor yourself to, versus kind of something that's a bit more fluffy and conceptual in some of these seminars that we're talking about. So you're now kind of on the habits path. You're obviously into habits and good habits for yourself. So, where does the research take you? Like, where do you go once you decide to write the book, The Health Habits?
Well, it took me in two places because the book is divided into two parts. So the first part is all around physical health. So I made the decision to just focus on physical health in terms of sleep, nutrition, and movement, and not focus on mental health, despite the fact that I am a psychologist, because I just thought mental health, I can't do it justice as just the fourth part or the fourth pillar, if you like, of health.
It's the
Um,
next book.
it's the next book. It's potentially the next book. I mean, like, it's an easy idea for a next book. I'm not sure if it will be the next book though. But anyway, but yeah, like, at the moment, I'm saying no to new opportunities at the moment because of various factors in terms of how my roles changed at Inventium. But it's it's in the back of my mind, and so the like I knew a lot about all those areas, and also just through personal health challenges I've had of suffering from chronic insomnia for many years and being a complete sugar addict. So I've done a lot of learning, but I wanted to speak to the best of the best. So I researched who are the top professors in certain fields that I wanted to delve into in the book. Interviewed a whole bunch of them from all around the world at top universities, and also other health experts outside of academia to understand what are the most impactful things that we can be doing to improve our sleep, nutrition, and movement that are currently underutilized. Because I didn't want it to be a book just stating the obvious. I didn't want it to be a book that was like, eat more vegetables, or like move more, or just like rubbish like that we're fed, and it's like, yeah, I knew that. So I wanted it to be stuff that was new news for people, even people like me that are really into health. And then the second part of the book was easier to research, I must say, because that was just going into my heartland, psychology and behavior change, and looking at and rereading many studies that I'd read around how can we change behavior, to make that behavior change stick. And so the second part of the book is broken up into four sections, which identifies the four biggest barriers that are standing in the way to making change permanent, and then has habit change strategies around those areas.
On the physical side, with sleep and diet and movement, there were some pretty cool things that I heard when I listened to one of your interviews. But I'd like you to share, like, what were some of the headline things that kind of were like, wow, that really you didn't think were the case
Mm.
necessarily.
Well, let's start with sleep. So this is one of the things that I did know before writing the book, and I'm still surprised how how little known this strategy is. And I learned this back in my mid 20s, where I um I had very bad insomnia, had a lot of anxiety with the idea of going to bed, because I associated bed with a place where I would just be up all night with my thoughts and not sleeping and just not having a good time of it. And I remember one morning I was driving to work. I was living in Sydney at the time, and it was 8 a.m. and I was stuck in peak hour traffic on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, as was my normal morning routine, just stuck in traffic. And I remember, like, I was just, really tired, as I always was in the mornings. I was just tired all day. And I was just like having this random thought to myself, I wonder if there are some people that actually like feel energetic during the day and actually have energy for the whole day. And like I thought, oh, could you imagine? And then I thought, that probably exists. Like, there are actually probably people in this world that have energy all day. And then I thought, hmm, maybe I've got a problem. Maybe I have got a problem. And so I got to work and I think I Googled something like sleep doctor Sydney, and found like a really great sleep doctor in Sydney who I saw. And I went in for I can never pronounce this right. It's something like polysomnograph, which basically means an overnight sleep study. So he had a kind of particular room set up in his office that like looked like it was, grandma's bedroom from like a 1950s TV show kind of vibe. It was weird. And then you get into your pajamas at night, and they hook you up to a machine that's like you've got about 40 or 50 electrodes just stuck all over your body, including like onto your hair. And then there's a video camera and someone is literally watching you sleep for the night. And I remember getting into bed going, like, I can't sleep at the best of times. How on earth am I going to sleep with all these things stuck on me? I can't even move without the cords coming off. But anyway, I managed to get apparently about 5 hours sleep. And what I learned from the results is that, the good news was that physically there was nothing wrong with me. Like I didn't have sleep apnea, which is very common, or some kind of sleep disorder. But then the bad news was it was psychological, and there was sadly no magic pill for that. And so what the doctor gave me, like the very first strategy that he said, is he asked me to estimate how much time I was spending in bed. And at the time, I estimated, which is going to sound crazy, like it was probably about, I don't like 9 or 10 hours. Would estimate I'd get into bed at about 9 p.m. I'd get out at about 7 a.m., which sounds like a really long period of time. But as an insomniac, the logic that I had applied, and I think this is very common logic, is the longer I'm in bed, the better chance I've got of catching some sleep. So I thought that was actually going to improve my sleep. Then the sleep doctor said, how much time do you estimate that you're actually sleeping in that 10-hour block? And I said, I reckon it's maybe 6 hours. And he said, okay, we are going to use sleep restriction to improve your sleep. So doctor's orders were keeping my wake time the same at 7 a.m. He said, you're only allowed in bed for 6 hours now, because that's apparently how much sleep you're getting. And so I had to stay up until 1 a.m., which to me was crazy. Like, that's so late. I'm definitely a morning person. And so, and by the time 1 a.m. came around, like I was so exhausted. I'd have to stop myself from falling asleep, like on the couch where I think I was, like, reading or watching TV to keep myself awake. And what sleep restriction does, and basically when you are at a point, which typically takes a few days, of restricting your sleep to say 6 hours, um, when you're sleeping for that whole 6 hours, you get to extend it by about half an hour. So then I could go to bed at 12:30, and then after a few days of successfully sleeping properly for 6.5 hours straight, I could then go to bed at midnight, and basically extending it until you feel like either your sleep quality is being affected, or you feel like, yep, this is how much sleep I need to operate well during the day. And I write about that strategy in the book. It is, I think, like, if, for people that have seen a sleep doctor and physical sleep disorders have been ruled out, it's one of the most common strategies. And for me, it was a game changer. It was far and away the most impactful thing that I'd done to improve my sleep. So that was a very long answer, but that was
No, no, no.
that
It's
was
a good
what happened to
answer.
me personally.
And this, how, when you had your daughter, did that stay or go out of the window? Like that, what happened? I mean, I'm asking this question because I've got two young kids, and my 6-year-old right now, he is in my bed. He ends up in our bed every night. We're in this process of trying to get him out, but he's like in this really bad place where his nightmares, like he's terrified. And so he's in my room right now, like 4 or 5 times a night. And we're trying to work a strategy to like get him comfortable. And that's a whole saga. And, I'm losing my temper and it's all bad. But, uh, the challenge for me is I'm a very light sleeper. And, having kids has exacerbated that. But like every time he comes into the room and he leaves, I'm then kind of thinking about either work or I'm anticipating him coming back. And
Mm.
I know, I mean, this is kind of for people that will become parents, this is kind of becomes the norm. But like back to you, like how did that having your daughter shape or reshape the whole sleep piece?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I would say there's no one size fits all answer. And also, I'm not a child psychologist, but I can share what I did personally and how I've navigated that. So something advice that I got before. So I've got the one child, and she's
Mhm.
9, and the advice that I got before she was born is just book into sleep school. And sleep school is a thing that exists, I think, in most capital cities, certainly in Australia. There's certainly a few in Melbourne and Sydney, where you basically go to learn how to get your child into good sleep habits. And typically, parents enroll in sleep school. I say enroll, that sounds like it's an actual school, but it's typically residential. Like the one that I went to, I was there for 5 nights, and you get help from really experienced doctors and nurses around how do you help your child sleep better, or your newborn or toddler. And so I enrolled myself and my daughter at birth, like literally, because there are ridiculously long waiting lists, and the one that I went to in Melbourne, I think there was a 12-week wait list for. So I'm like, that's fine. Like, the first few weeks, I'm like, I'm just gonna, be led by what Frankie needs, and and just threw all the rule books out the window, because I just sort of felt that was the best approach for
Mm.
me and my family for the first few weeks. And then when Frankie was 3 months old, we'd got past the 12-week waiting list, and in we went to sleep school. And I learned some brilliant things. So it was Masada Sleep School. I think it still exists in Melbourne. And just immersed myself in, okay, what do I need to do? How do I
Mm.
how do I calm Frankie if she's woken up and she's crying, or she just like can't relax herself, and learnt some strategies there, sort of like around like patting techniques for the baby. And that worked really well. I think that most people that I kept in touch with that were also at Masada with me, their baby's sleep or the child's sleep definitely improved. But it didn't improve for everyone. So I don't think that's this blanket solution that is like this magic bullet. Um, and then, like in terms of what you're experiencing now with a child coming into the bedroom, which can be really hard. I experienced that when Frankie was about 5 years old, and I separated from her father, and like there was like a I don't know, maybe a couple of month period where Frankie would just come into my room every night. And then I sort of got to a point where I'm like, oh, I think I need to nip this behavior in the bud. And the advice that I got is to, well, like, which is a pain in the ass when you're implementing it, but basically when she comes in, just go, okay, Frankie, let's go back to your room. And then you settle them back in their bedroom. And sometimes you just sit with them until they've fallen asleep. And I'll still use the kind of the patting technique I learnt at Masada on Frankie, and just kind of just calmly ushering them back to their room, which is the last thing that you want to be doing because you're so sleepy. And the easy thing to do is just go, okay, just come into bed so I can get back to sleep. So I did that for a few nights, and fairly quickly that behavior changed, and it hasn't been an issue since. But as I say, sample of one, that's been my experience.
Mhm. Yeah, we what we did was we put him in the same room as his little sister, who's like 2.5, but she's like the boss, and he was good. And then we went to the U.S. and I kind of let him play video games and stuff. And I think he just kind of was sleeping with me in the U.S. for about 3 to 4 weeks and came home. And now he'll try to climb into her bed, and I could hear her yelling at him. She's like, "No, get out!" Like she's such a, Anyway, so I mean, but I think that the overarching message there is for people that are parents or to become parents, like you still have to find a way to protect that sleep, particularly like if
Mm,
you are doing important work or work in the day, and having a strategy and a plan
mm,
is really really important.
mm.
um, and so the other thing that was really a call out for me, I'm a person that does a lot of exercise. I do a lot of calisthenics, and was the piece around that, what was it, like 20 seconds on?
Yes, a reHIT
Yeah.
workout. Yes, yes. And again, like this research has been around for probably about a decade, I think, but it's not mainstream. So everyone knows about HIT training, high intensity interval training, where you go hard and then you have a bit of a break and then you go hard and then, repeat that multiple times over, say, a 30-minute period. And that's pretty common. And most fitness apps will have, their version of HIT workout. But REHIT workout stands for reduced exertion high intensity interval training. And this is what I think is really interesting, because I think a really common barrier to people trying to get fit or at least adopt some kind of a fitness routine or habit is that they have this misconception that it's going to take a lot of time. It's like, well, I need an hour for that because I need to get changed and drive to a gym, and then I do my work, and then I drive home and get changed, and then I have to shower, and so I can't do it in the middle of the workday because it's too time consuming, and so on and so forth. There's so many mental barriers in the way. And so what reHIT training is it's kind of like HIT, but it's a lot shorter, and it gets you very good results when we're talking about cardiovascular fitness, which is a really important type of fitness because it is associated with lower mortality rates in terms of, like, we live longer. So it's super important. And so what the literally the most time effective reHIT protocol, if you like, that has been researched, and this comes from the University of Bath, is that they had a group of participants come into the lab 3 times a week for 6 weeks. And the workout that they were asked to do is to do like a short warm up, 2 or 3 minute warm up on an exercise bike, then do an all out 20-second sprint, like as hard as you can go. Like it burns. Like I do reHIT workouts at least once a week, and it's hard. So it's intense, 20 seconds of pain. Then you are like recovering for about 2 or 3 minutes until your heart rate is back down to normal, and then you're repeating that 20-second all out sprint, and then you finish with a cool down for a couple of minutes just to get your heart rate back down to sort of a normal level. And so they had people do that particular reHIT protocol in the lab 3 times a week for 6 weeks. Their cardiovascular fitness improved by up to 15%. And if you're a runner or a jogger, and like I'm a slow jogger, although I've sort of replaced that habit with other things at the moment, like you would have to be going on runs or jogs 5 times a week, 40 minutes at a time for 6 weeks to see those kind of gains. So they're really massive gains for a short period of time.
Yeah, I think the the major call out there is that most people would benefit to reframe how they look at working out. Like it's not, it need not be an event. Like I'm that guy where when my kids are at the playground, I'm finding leverage to either push or pull on the actual
Mm.
playground gear, right? Because yeah, I'm like the kid parents are kind of looking at me like, because you can use that 10 or 15 minutes. Like it doesn't have to, you could be wearing jeans. You don't have to be wearing active wear and, Lululemon or Lord and Jane. Like you
Yeah.
could just, it doesn't have to be a thing. So yeah, I think that's really excellent. I want to move, as we start to land the plane to kind of the psychological elements of behavior change. A question that I wanted to ask you is, like, with that, what's the role of identity and how we see ourselves? And this may be through research or opinion in terms of sustaining behavior change and that psychological piece.
It is super important. There is plenty of research to back this up that in order to really change your habits for good, particularly like if there's a cognitive barrier at play, like you're just, like when you're feeling really tired, exhausted, burnt out, it's really hard to make a permanent change. But if you can start to change your self identity, your behavior will typically follow whether you like it or not. So for me, I've done this in a few ways. Certainly with regards to exercise, I've definitely made this change. I was the kind of person that was, picked last for every school sports team. I was like very slow. Was always the last to finish in any kind of athletics race or swimming race. I was quite uncoordinated. I was just a very unsporty, unfit kid. And I took that self identity through to adulthood, as you do, like when that's kind of how you see yourself as a child. And, continued with that. And like, yeah, I'd kind of like, go in and out of exercise fads, with the primary motivation of being, I'm just going to lose that, like 5 kilos or whatever. So really the motivation was around aesthetics as opposed to health. But something switched in me about 5 years ago when I started like I wouldn't say I discovered because I'd done weight training before, but I hadn't done it sort of properly or religiously in terms of like sticking to it. Um, and for the last 5 years, through various means and people, weight training, resistance training has become like habitual for me. So I do it 4 times a week without fail. I think the only time I've missed it is like when I had COVID, a couple of years ago. But otherwise, I train, and part of my self identity now, and I truly believe it, is that I am like a fit, strong person. And so not training, like, we, as humans, we don't want to do things that feel like they're contradicting how we see ourselves. We want to act in a way that's consistent. So there's a lot of research around changing your self identity is really key if you're going to make, say, dietary changes, like the way that you eat, the way that you move, really stick for good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that cognitive dissonance piece, right? Like I think, many people unfortunately give up before the miracle. And I think the more that we change our habits and our behavior, the more that we start to trust the process when we implement a new one, that it will ultimately become incorporated in who we are. And I think I think the the unknown element is like that period of like initial inertia, and I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, or I want to optimize, or like this isn't working. And there's some inertia there, and maybe some will that we need to generate. But I think if we can trust in the process, that if we continue and stay on the track, it will become easier. And I think a lot of people give up, and I think that's why obviously New Year's resolutions are a thing, but don't necessarily work as well as people would like them to. In terms of your own, we always ask kind of our guests this, like, what's a habit that's really important for you?
Oh, I've got a lot. But I would say, like, it's really simple, but having a consistent sleep wake time is very important for me. I really struggle, and I find like that days can get put out if I'm waking at a significantly different time to where I would naturally wake, which is about 6:30. So, if for example I've got an early start, like last week I was doing some breakfast TV interviews, or the week before for the launch of the Health Habit, and I had to get up quite early. And well, I can get up early, that's fine. It throws my body clock out for several days, and my body clock then is waking at 5 a.m. instead of 6:30. And yeah, so I where possible, I religiously stick to it, quite a similar bedtime and quite a similar wake time.
Yeah, I think that's simple, not necessarily easy, but it
Yeah.
is definitely a game changer. And so our audience, right? They're gonna want to learn more. They're gonna read the books, the Time Wise or Health Habits. And I know you've got more books out there. Like, where can they learn more about you, Amantha, and Inventium?
So, both are very Googleable. If you put Inventium into a search engine, you'll probably very easily find us. It's invent with an IUM, and likewise, Amantha. It's like Samantha without the S. There's not many. You can find me on LinkedIn and Insta and at amantha.com. Yeah, if you search for The Health Habit or Time Wise, they're my most recent books. Wherever you get books, again, you will find them.
And it's on Audible too, yeah?
It sure is
Yeah.
on Audible.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time, Amantha. Really appreciate you, and thanks for all the insights and wisdom distilled today. Really, really appreciate you coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.